When Samuel Johnson woke up that morning, he expected it to be just another day on his farm, tending to his crops and living the simple life he had always known. But little did he know, this day would push him to the edge and reveal not just the strength of his spirit, but the power of family. As Samuel went about his day, he noticed something unsettling. A pair of local officers watching his every move, their intentions anything but friendly. What started as routine harassment quickly escalated into something far more sinister, as they preyed on him because of the color of his skin. But what those officers didn't realize was that Samuel wasn't just a humble farmer. And as the truth about his family and their influence came to light, it wasn't just the officers who were left in shock. It set off a ripple effect that would change their town forever. Before we get into this gripping story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. And if you're ready to be moved by Samuel's journey, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. The morning sun cast long shadows across Samuel Johnson's farm as he worked methodically through his daily routine. At 78 years old, his movements were slower than they used to be, but his hands remained steady and strong from decades of working the land. The dawn light caught the silvery strands in his close-cropped hair as he bent to inspect a row of young corn shoots, his weathered fingers gently touching the tender leaves. Looking good this year, he murmured to himself, satisfaction evident in his deep voice. The 20 acres he tended weren't vast by modern farming standards, but every inch was meticulously maintained. The neat rows of vegetables, the well-maintained fencing, and the freshly painted barn stood as testament to Samuel's lifelong dedication. Rising carefully, he stretched his back and surveyed his property. The modest white farmhouse where he'd raised his family sat at the end of a dirt driveway. Its wraparound porch swept clean despite the constant battle with Georgia red clay dust. This land had been in his family for 3 generations, purchased by his grandfather in the years following emancipation. Samuel felt that history in every step he took across the fields. As the morning progressed, Samuel climbed into his old pickup truck, heading into town for supplies. The vehicle, like everything else he owned, was well-maintained despite its age. He pulled into Parker's General Store, the bell above the door announcing his arrival, with a cheerful jingle. "Morning, Mr. Johnson," Tommy Parker called out from behind the counter. The young shopkeeper's face lit up with genuine warmth. "How are those tomatoes coming along?" "Morning, Tommy," Samuel replied, his usually serious expression softening. "They're coming along just fine. Should have the first batch ready for your mama's famous chow chow in about 2 weeks. She'll be mighty pleased to hear that. Nobody's tomatoes compare to yours, Mr. Johnson. It's like you've got magic in those hands." As Samuel gathered his supplies, other customers filtered in and out of the store. Some, like Mrs. Harrison, the retired schoolteacher, offered polite but distant nods. Others, like Bill Whitaker and his teenage son, deliberately avoided eye contact, shifting away when Samuel walked down the same aisle. The subtle dance of small-town racial dynamics played out in silent gestures and averted gazes. "Don't mind them none, Mr. Johnson," Tommy said quietly as he rang up Samuel's purchases. "Some folks just can't seem to move with the times." Samuel's smile was gentle but tired. "Been that way all my life, son. Some things change slower than others." He counted out exact change from his worn leather wallet, the movement practiced and precise. Driving back home, Samuel's eyes briefly caught the photograph tucked into his dashboard. It showed a younger version of himself standing proudly next to his son Derek at his FBI Academy graduation. Now a high-ranking official in the bureau, Derek had come a long way from the curious boy who used to follow Samuel around the farm, asking endless questions about everything from soil pH to weather patterns. Samuel's chest swelled with pride at the thought of his son's achievements, though he rarely spoke of them to others. That wasn't his way. Besides, in his experience, drawing attention to success, especially as a black man in a small southern town, often invited trouble. As if summoned by that very thought, red and blue lights suddenly flashed in his rearview mirror. Samuel's hands tightened on the steering wheel as he carefully pulled over to the side of the empty country road. He'd been driving exactly the speed limit, as he always did, and his truck's registration and insurance were current. Two officers approached, one on each side of the vehicle. Their nameplates read Miller and Tucker. Officer Miller, a stocky man with close-cropped blonde hair, tapped on the driver's window with his flashlight despite the bright morning sun. Samuel lowered the window, keeping his hands visible on the steering wheel. "Good morning, officers. Is there a problem?" "License and registration," Miller demanded without preamble, his tone carrying an edge of contempt. As Samuel carefully reached for his documents, Officer Tucker spoke from the passenger side. "Your taillight's out, old-timer." "With all due respect, officer, I checked all my lights just yesterday." "They were working fine," Samuel replied calmly, though his heart was beginning to race. "You call my partner a liar?" Miller's voice turned dangerous. "No, sir. Just stating a fact." "Step out of the vehicle," Miller ordered. Samuel complied slowly, his joints protesting the sudden movement. The officers made him stand by the roadside while they performed an unnecessarily thorough inspection of his truck. Other vehicles passed by, slowing to stare at the scene, an elderly man being questioned by two officers. Samuel kept his face neutral, though shame burned in his chest. "Well, would you look at that?" Tucker announced after their inspection. "Tail light's working now. Must have been a loose connection." "You're lucky this time," Miller added, handing back Samuel's documents with deliberate carelessness. "Better keep everything in proper order, Mr. Johnson. Never know when we might need to perform another inspection." The threat in those words was clear as crystal. Samuel waited until the patrol car pulled away before getting back into his truck. His hands were shaking slightly as he put the key in the ignition. The rest of the drive home passed in a blur. Samuel parked his truck in its usual spot and unloaded his supplies mechanically, his mind replaying the encounter. The weight of the officer's words pressed down on him like a physical burden. Instead of going inside, he walked out to his fields. The familiar smell of earth and growing things usually brought him peace, but today it provided little comfort. As he moved between the rows of plants, checking for insects and adjusting support stakes, his movements were automatic, his thoughts elsewhere. The sun climbed higher in the sky, but Samuel barely noticed the increasing heat. He worked steadily, losing himself in physical labor as he had done so many times before when troubled. But the unease remained, settling deep in his bones like an unwelcome guest. As evening approached, Samuel finally stopped working and stood at the edge of his property. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, a beautiful sight that usually filled him with satisfaction after a day's work. Today, however, he could only think about what tomorrow might bring. He glanced down at his soil-stained hands that had worked this land for over 5 decades, hands that had raised his son to become a man of justice and integrity. These same hands now trembled slightly as he thought about the officer's veiled threats. A whippoorwill called from the woods behind his house, its mournful song echoing across the darkening fields. Samuel squared his shoulders and headed inside, determined to carry this burden alone. But as he cleaned up for the evening, the quiet of his empty house seemed to amplify his concerns. Before bed, he paused at the window, looking out over his darkened farm. The moon cast enough light to silhouette the barn and storage sheds, structures he'd built or maintained himself over the years. This land was more than just property. It was his heritage, his life's work, his legacy. The thought that it might now become a source of vulnerability weighed heavily on his heart. "Lord, give me strength," he whispered into the darkness, his voice barely audible even to himself. Then he turned away from the window, preparing himself for whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, knowing that for now, his fears would have to remain unspoken. The patrol car sat idle behind May's Country Diner, its engine ticking as it cooled in the late morning heat. Inside, officers Miller and Tucker lingered over their third cup of coffee, the remains of breakfast scattered across the dashboard. The air conditioning struggled against the Georgia summer, and sweat beaded on Miller's forehead as he watched customers come and go from the diner's sun-bleached entrance. "You know what I've been thinking about?" Miller said, wiping his face with a paper napkin. That old man Johnson's place. Did you see how well-maintained everything was? Man that age, sitting on property like that. Bet he's got a nice little nest egg tucked away. Tucker shifted in his seat, the leather creaking beneath him. Yeah, I noticed that too. All that equipment, those new storage sheds. Even got one of them fancy irrigation systems in his south field. He took a long sip of his coffee, grimacing at the bitter dregs. People like him, they always keep cash around. Don't trust banks much. Can't blame him, Miller chuckled darkly. Banks weren't too friendly to their kind back in the day. But he's got money stashed all over that farm. The morning sun glinted off the diner's windows, casting sharp reflections across their faces. Tucker crumpled his empty cup and tossed it into the back seat, where it joined a small collection of fast food wrappers and empty energy drink cans. Remember that Vietnamese couple with the convenience store over in Bedford County? He asked, a slow smile spreading across his face. What was it we found wrong with their place? Health code violations? Fire code, Miller corrected, grinning. Amazing how many violations you can find when you know where to look. They paid up nice and quiet, didn't they? $5,000 to make it all go away. Then another $3 the next month, Tucker added, until they finally sold the place and moved away. Shame about that. Both officers laughed, the sound echoing in the confined space of their patrol car. Miller's fingers drummed against the steering wheel, his wedding ring catching the sunlight. Johnson's going to be even easier, he said confidently. Man's all alone out there. No wife, she passed years ago. Son moved away to the big city. Nobody to make a fuss. Plus, who's he going to complain to? Tucker snorted. Sheriff Davis? Man spends more time on the golf course than in his office. Deputy Phillips? That boy's so green he probably still sleeps with his teddy bear. Perfect setup, Miller agreed. And it's about time we did another property inspection, don't you think? Make sure everything's up to code. The patrol car's engine roared to life, and they pulled out onto the main road. The town's modest buildings gave way to rolling farmland, the morning sun painting everything in deceptively peaceful shades of gold and green. Samuel was on his knees in the vegetable garden when he heard the crunch of tires on gravel. He'd been carefully tending to his tomato plants, adjusting their supports and checking for signs of blight. The sound made him freeze, his hands buried in the warm earth. He knew, even before he looked up, who it would be. The patrol car's door creaked open, and Miller stepped out, adjusting his gun belt with practiced authority. Tucker followed, already pulling out a clipboard and pen. Samuel slowly stood, his knees protesting the movement. Soil fell from his calloused hands as he wiped them against his worn work pants. "Good morning, officers," he said carefully, trying to keep his voice steady. "What brings you out here today?" Miller approached with the confident stride of a man used to intimidating others. "Routine property inspection, Mr. Johnson. We've had some complaints about local farms not meeting safety and zoning requirements." The word complaints hung in the air like summer humidity. Samuel felt sweat trickle down his back, and not just from the heat. "Complaints?" He frowned, glancing between the two officers. "I've been farming this land for over 50 years. Never had any complaints before." Tucker was already walking toward the barn, his boots leaving deep impressions in the soft soil of Samuel's carefully maintained paths. "Well, times change, don't they? New regulations, new standards. Gotta keep up with progress." For the next hour, Samuel followed the officers around his property, watching helplessly as they invented violations out of thin air. Miller paused by the fertilizer storage shed, clicking his tongue disapprovingly. "These chemical storage protocols are completely outdated," he declared, making notes on his clipboard. "But I don't use chemicals," Samuel protested. "Everything here is organic. Has been for 20 years now." Miller looked up, his eyes cold. "That what you're going to tell the EPA when they come out here? Argue with them like you're arguing with us?" Samuel fell silent, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. They moved on to the barn, where Tucker ran his hand along the ancient but sturdy wooden beams. "Fire suppression systems inadequate," he announced. And these setbacks from the property line? Not up to code. Not even close. Those property lines were established in 1920, Samuel said quietly. They've never been an issue before. Before being the operative word, Mr. Johnson, Miller said, his voice dripping with false concern. Times change. Standards change. People need to change with them, don't they? The morning had grown hot and sticky, but Samuel felt a deep chill in his bones. He watched as the officers continued their charade of inspection, knowing what was coming but powerless to stop it. Finally, Miller turned to face him, holding up his clipboard like a shield. This is quite a list of violations, Mr. Johnson. Could mean serious trouble. Health department might have to get involved. Maybe even shut you down temporarily while you get up to code. The words hit Samuel like physical blows. Shut down? But I'm in the middle of growing season. My crops. Of course, there might be a way to handle this unofficially, Tucker interrupted, sharing a look with his partner. Save everyone a lot of paperwork and trouble. $2,000 should cover the first round of improvements. The amount hung in the air between them. Samuel's mouth went dry as cotton. $2,000? That's cheaper than losing your farm, isn't it? Miller's voice had an edge sharp enough to cut. We'd hate to see that happen, Mr. Johnson. Place like this, been in your family a long time, hasn't it? Samuel looked around at his land. The neat rows of vegetables, the well-maintained buildings, the fields his father had worked before him. Everything he'd built his life around, everything he'd hoped to pass on to Derek someday. The weight of generations seemed to press down on his shoulders. I'll need to go to the house to get it, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Inside his kitchen, Samuel's hands trembled as he reached for the old coffee can hidden behind the flour containers in his pantry. The metal was cool against his fingers as he removed the lid. Inside lay the money he'd been saving for new irrigation equipment that would have helped him expand his organic operation next season. As he counted out the bills, memories flooded his mind. His father teaching him to count change in this very kitchen. His late wife, Grace, keeping their modest books at the same table. Young Derek doing his homework there, while Samuel calculated crop yields. Now here he was, counting out protection money like something from an old gangster movie. When he handed over the money, Miller didn't even bother to count it. He just folded the bills and stuffed them in his shirt pocket, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Smart choice, he said, patting his pocket. We'll be back to check on those improvements. Keep up the good work, Mr. Johnson. The patrol car's engine roared to life, and Samuel watched them drive away, dust billowing in their wake. He stood in his driveway until the dust settled, then walked slowly back into his house. The kitchen felt different now, tainted somehow by what had just happened. He sank into his chair at the kitchen table, his body feeling suddenly ancient. The morning sun streamed through the window, falling across the faded tablecloth Grace had picked out years ago. The cheerful pattern seemed to mock him now. Pulling out his checkbook and savings book, Samuel began to do calculations that made his heart heavier with each number he wrote. The irrigation money was gone. His monthly Social Security check wouldn't come close to covering another inspection. The small profit he made from selling his organic vegetables at the farmer's market would barely keep the lights on. His eyes drifted to the phone on the wall. He could call Derek. His son would want to know about this, would probably insist on helping. But the thought made Samuel's stomach churn. Derek had worked so hard to build his career, to make something of himself beyond this small town. The last thing he needed was his father's troubles pulling him back. The next few days brought no relief. The officers returned twice more, each time with new violations to cite and higher demands for money. $4,000 for supposed electrical code violations in the barn. Wiring that Samuel's licensed electrician cousin had installed just last year. $3,000 for improper waste management, though his composting system was so efficient that the County Agricultural Extension Office had used it as a demonstration site. Each visit left him more drained, both financially and emotionally. His savings vanished like morning dew under a hot sun. The stress began to show in his work. He found himself making simple mistakes, forgetting to water sections of crops, missing signs of pest damage he would normally spot immediately. His beloved farm, always so meticulously maintained, began to show signs of neglect. The tomato plants he'd been so proud of developed blight because he missed the early warning signs. The corn wasn't getting proper irrigation because he couldn't focus on maintaining the schedule. Even his regular customers at the farmer's market noticed the decline in quality, though they were too polite to mention it. One evening, as he sat on his porch trying to figure out how to make his remaining money stretch, his phone rang. Seeing Derek's name on the caller ID made his heart skip a beat. For a moment, he considered not answering, but he knew his son would only worry more if he didn't pick up. "Hey, Dad," Derek's warm voice came through the speaker. "Just checking in. How are you doing?" Samuel shifted in his rocking chair, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm fine, son. Just another day on the farm. How's work keeping you?" "Busy as always. But something tells me you're not fine, Dad. Tommy Parker called me earlier today." Samuel closed his eyes, his free hand gripping the porch railing. Of course Tommy would notice something was wrong. The boy had known him his whole life, had practically grown up in Samuel's kitchen eating Grace's cookies and listening to farming stories. "It's nothing I can't handle, Derek." "Dad?" Derek's voice was firm now, reminding Samuel of Grace when she wouldn't let him dodge a difficult conversation. "Tommy says you look tired, worried. Says you've stopped coming into town as much. And he mentioned something about police cars being out at the farm. What's going on?" Samuel sat silent for a long moment, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, the same colors his father had taught him to watch for, to predict the next day's weather. The weight of the past weeks pressed down on him like a physical thing. There have been some issues with the local police," he finally admitted. "They've been conducting inspections, finding violations." "What kind of violations?" "All kinds. Safety codes, zoning regulations. They say they could shut down the farm if I don't address them. And let me guess, they're offering to handle it unofficially for cash payments?" Samuel's silence was answer enough. The creaking of his rocking chair filled the pause in conversation. "How much have they taken, Dad?" "About 9,000 so far," Samuel admitted quietly, the number tasting bitter in his mouth. "But Derek, don't you worry about $9,000? Derek's voice rose. "Dad, that's extortion. Why didn't you tell me sooner? You've got your own life, your own responsibilities. I didn't want to burden you with this." "You're not a burden, Dad. You're my father, and what they're doing is illegal." "How long has this been going on?" "Couple of weeks now, since they pulled me over about a supposed broken tail light." There was a pause on the line, and Samuel could practically hear his son thinking. When Derek spoke again, his voice was calmer, but had a steel edge to it that Samuel recognized from Grace's dealings with people who tried to take advantage of them. "Okay, Dad, I want you to promise me something. If they come back, don't give them any more money. Just stall them. Tell them you need time to get it together. Can you do that?" "I can try," Samuel said, watching a whippoorwill swoop across his field, catching insects in the fading light. "But son, please don't do anything that might make things worse. These men, they're not afraid to throw their weight around. Trust me, Dad. I know exactly how to handle people like this. Just hold on a little longer, okay?" After hanging up, Samuel remained on the porch until the fireflies began to emerge, their gentle lights blinking in the gathering dusk. The evening air was heavy with the scent of his jasmine vines, Grace's favorite. She planted them when they first married, and he'd maintained them carefully after she passed, just as he maintained everything else on the farm. Inside, he looked at the family photo on his mantle, himself, Grace, and young Derek at his high school graduation. Grace would have insisted on telling Derek from the start. She never believed in suffering in silence. "Pride's all well and good," she used to say, "but it won't keep you warm at night or put food on the table." "Maybe you were right, old girl," he whispered to the photo, touching it gently. "Maybe you were right all along." He went to bed that night with his mind still churning. But for the first time in weeks, a small spark of hope had kindled in his chest. Outside his window, the whippoorwill called again, its song carrying across the darkened fields where generations of his family had worked and dreamed and endured. Whatever came next, he wasn't alone anymore. Derek Johnson sat in his Washington, D.C. office, the glow of his computer screen illuminating his concerned face as he dug through police records. His father's phone call had set off every alarm bell in his mind, and now, 3 days later, he was piecing together a disturbing pattern. Jesus Christ, he muttered, scrolling through complaint after complaint against officers Miller and Tucker. Most had been dismissed or buried, but the pattern was clear. Traffic stops targeting minority business owners, suspicious property inspections, complaints that mysteriously disappeared after cash changed hands. His office phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. Johnson speaking. "Sir, I've got those financial records you requested on the Spencer County Police Department," his assistant said. "Sending them to your secure email now." "Thanks, Sarah." "And the surveillance photos?" "Coming through as well." Our field office in Atlanta was very cooperative. Derek opened the files, his jaw tightening as he studied the images. They showed Miller and Tucker making repeated visits to various minority-owned businesses in the county. The financial records told an even more damning story. Both officers had made suspicious cash deposits far exceeding their salaries. His cell phone buzzed. Tommy Parker calling again. "Tommy, what's happening?" "Mr. Derek, they're back at your daddy's farm right now. And something feels different this time. They've got mean looks about them." Derek's heart raced. "I'm on my way. Keep an eye on things, but don't intervene." He was already moving, grabbing his jacket and badge. "Sarah, initiate operation cleanup. Alert the Atlanta field office. We're moving now." Meanwhile, at the farm, Samuel stood in his driveway, facing Miller and Tucker. The morning sun cast harsh shadows across their faces as they approached, their stance more aggressive than ever. $20,000, Miller demanded, stepping into Samuel's personal space. "That's what it'll take to keep your farm operational this month." Samuel's hands trembled, but his voice remained steady. "I don't have that kind of money. And even if I did, I wouldn't give it to you." Tucker's face darkened. "Wrong answer, old man. You've been cooperative up till now. Don't ruin a good thing." "Good thing?" Samuel's voice rose slightly. "You've taken almost everything I have. My savings, my equipment, money. No more." Miller's hand moved to his belt. "Maybe we need to show you what happens when people don't cooperate." He walked over to Samuel's tractor, pulling out his baton. "Shame about this equipment. Accidents happen all the time on farms." The baton crashed through the tractor's gauge cluster, sending glass flying. Samuel moved forward instinctively, but Tucker blocked his path. "That tractor belonged to my father," Samuel said, his voice shaking with anger now. "I won't let you destroy what generations of my family have built." "You won't let us?" Miller laughed, smashing another piece of equipment. "What are you going to do about it, old man? Call the police?" Tucker joined in, kicking over carefully organized tool racks. "Maybe we should check that barn of yours. Probably full of safety violations. Might need to burn it down, start fresh. Touch that barn, and it'll be the last thing you do." The new voice cut through the chaos like a knife. Everyone turned to see Derek Johnson standing there, his FBI badge gleaming in the morning sun. He looked every inch the federal agent in his dark suit, his stance radiating authority. "Who the hell are you?" Miller demanded, though his voice had lost some of its edge. "FBI Assistant Director Derek Johnson." He moved to stand beside his father. "And you're both under arrest." Tucker forced a laugh. "For what?" "We're conducting a routine property inspection." "Right, Mr. Johnson?" He looked at Samuel with threatening eyes. "The only routine thing here is your pattern of extortion," Derek replied calmly. "We've been building a case against you for weeks. Every complaint, every suspicious deposit, every inspection. It's all documented." Miller's face had gone pale, but he tried to maintain control. "You can't prove anything. It's our word against his." "Actually," Derek smiled coldly, "it's your word against about 20 victims we've interviewed. Plus surveillance photos, financial records, and..." He paused as vehicles began pulling up to the farm. Federal agents who've been watching this whole encounter. FBI agents emerged from the vehicles, weapons drawn. "Hands where we can see them," one shouted. Miller and Tucker froze. their faces showing real fear for the first time. As agents moved in to handcuff them, neighbors began gathering at the edge of the property, drawn by the commotion. "You have the right to remain silent," Derek began, taking personal pleasure in reading them their rights. "Although I doubt that'll help you much. We've got enough evidence to put you away for a very long time." As the officers were led away, Samuel stood quietly watching, his expression unreadable. Derek turned to his father, concern etched on his face. "Dad, you okay?" Samuel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked over to his damaged tractor, running his hand along its scarred surface. "Your mother always said I was too proud for my own good." He finally spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "Said someday it would cost me. Dad, this wasn't about pride. You were trying to protect me, keep me from worrying, and look what it almost cost us." Samuel gestured to his vandalized equipment. "Everything we've built, everything we've worked for." "But they didn't win," Derek insisted, placing a hand on his father's shoulder. "You stood up to them in the end. That took real courage." Samuel turned to face his son, tears in his eyes. "I should have told you sooner. Should have trusted you with this burden. We're family, Dad. Your burdens are my burdens. Just like you carried mine all those years when I was growing up." Derek smiled softly. "Remember when I wanted to quit college my freshman year? You told me Johnson men don't quit. They ask for help when they need it. You remember that?" Samuel asked, surprised. "I remember everything you taught me, Dad, including the most important lesson. That true strength isn't about facing everything alone. It's about knowing when to stand together." They stood in silence for a moment, watching as FBI agents documented the damage and took statements from gathering neighbors. Tommy Parker had arrived and was talking animatedly with one of the agents, gesturing toward the farm. "Your mother would be proud of you," Samuel said finally. "The man you've become, the way you protect others. She'd be proud of both of us," Derek replied. "And Dad, I'm not just here to arrest those officers. I'm staying for a while, helping you get the farm back in shape." Samuel started to protest, but Derek held up his hand. "No arguments. I've got vacation time saved up, and this place needs some work. Besides," he grinned, "I miss your cooking." As the morning progressed, more townspeople arrived, drawn by the news of the arrests. Many came forward to share their own stories of harassment and extortion by the two officers. The FBI agents took statement after statement, building an even stronger case. Mrs. Harrison, the retired schoolteacher who had always been distant, approached Samuel with tears in her eyes. "Mr. Johnson, I'm so sorry. I knew something wasn't right, but I was afraid to speak up. We all were," Bill Whitaker added, joining them. "But you stood up to them. Showed us all what courage looks like." Samuel nodded, accepting their words without bitterness. "Sometimes it takes a storm to clear the air," he said quietly. As the crowd began to disperse, Derek organized a group of volunteers to help clean up the vandalism. Tommy Parker arrived with supplies from his store, refusing any payment. "You've been looking out for this community for decades, Mr. Johnson," Tommy said firmly. "Let us look out for you for a change." That evening, as the sun set over the farm, Samuel and Derek sat on the porch, drinking cold lemonade and watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. The damaged equipment had been cleared away, and plans were already in place for repairs. "You know what I keep thinking about?" Samuel said, rocking gently in his chair. "Your mother's favorite saying, 'The darkness doesn't last forever.'" Derek smiled. "She was right about that. Just like she was right about asking for help." A whippoorwill called from the woods, its familiar song carrying across the fields where generations of Johnsons had worked and endured. But tonight, its melody seemed less mournful, more like a celebration of strength and family bonds that couldn't be broken by fear or intimidation. "Tomorrow," Samuel said, "we'll start rebuilding. Together." "Together," Derek agreed, raising his glass in a quiet toast to family, justice, and the courage to stand up against darkness, no matter how long it takes for the light to shine through. The morning after the arrests, Samuel's farm became the epicenter of an unprecedented gathering. People arrived in waves, their cars lining the dirt road leading to his property. Black and white faces alike filled his yard, each person carrying a story of abuse at the hands of officers Miller and Tucker. "They threatened to shut down my hair salon last year," Mrs. Jenkins, an elderly black woman, shared with the FBI agents who had set up a temporary command post on Samuel's porch. "Said my ventilation system wasn't up to code. Took $3,000 to make it right." Similar stories poured in throughout the day. The Martinez family, who owned the Mexican restaurant in town, described months of harassment about their health permits. Mr. Chun, whose convenience store had been in the community for 2 decades, revealed how the officers had demanded protection money disguised as security consultation fees. Sarah Williams, a young reporter from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, moved through the crowd, recording testimonies and taking photographs. "This isn't just a local story anymore," she told Derek, who was coordinating with FBI investigators. "What happened here speaks to a pattern of systemic abuse that's been ignored for far too long." The town's mayor, John Patterson, arrived around noon, his face ashen as he listened to story after story. He'd been in office for 6 years but claimed ignorance of the officers' activities. "With all due respect, Mayor," Tommy Parker spoke up, his usually cheerful face serious. "We tried to report this. How many complaints got lost in the system? How many times did people come to town hall only to be turned away?" The mayor had no answer, but his silence spoke volumes. Local news vans began arriving by mid-afternoon. The story was spreading rapidly. FBI uncovers years of police corruption in small Georgia town. The headlines painted a damning picture of institutional failure and racial targeting. Sheriff Davis, who had spent more time on the golf course than in his office, submitted his resignation by email. 3 other officers who had known about Miller and Tucker's activities but remained silent were placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Through it all, Samuel watched from his kitchen window, still processing the events of the past few weeks. The sight of his damaged farm equipment had been replaced by something remarkable: people working together to repair what had been broken. Bill Whitaker and his teenage son were fixing the tractor's gauge cluster, using parts donated by the local farm supply store. Mrs. Harrison organized a group of women to prepare lunch for the volunteers. Even Mr. Chin closed his store early to help repaint the barn door that Tucker had damaged. "It's something else, isn't it?" Derek said, joining his father at the window. "All these people coming together?" Samuel nodded, his eyes misty. "Your mother always said there was more good than bad in people. Just takes the right moment for it to show." Outside, the work continued throughout the afternoon. The Martinez family's oldest son, who had just graduated with a degree in agricultural engineering, helped restore the irrigation system. Tommy Parker arrived with a truck full of supplies from his store, still refusing payment. "The way I see it," Tommy explained when Samuel tried to protest, "this community owes you a debt, Mr. Johnson. Not just for standing up to those officers, but for showing us what real strength looks like." As evening approached, Derek gathered everyone in the farmyard for an update on the investigation. "We've uncovered evidence of at least 50 instances of extortion," he announced. "Miller and Tucker are facing federal charges that will keep them behind bars for a long time. But more importantly, we're implementing changes to prevent this from happening again." He introduced Agent Maria Rodriguez, who would be overseeing the restructuring of the local police force. "We're establishing new oversight procedures," she explained. "Community review boards, mandatory body cameras, regular audits of all police interactions. This won't be a quick fix, but it's a start." The crowd nodded approvingly. For many, it was the first time they'd felt heard by law enforcement. Later that evening, after most people had gone home, Samuel sat on his porch with Derek, sharing a quiet moment as the sun set over the restored farm. "You know," Samuel said, breaking the comfortable silence, "I keep thinking about something your mother used to say. She'd tell me, 'Samuel Johnson, you're so busy standing tall, sometimes you forget to lean on others.'" Derek smiled. "She was right about that. She was right about a lot of things." Samuel looked out over his fields, where the evening light painted everything in soft gold. I spent so many years thinking I had to face everything alone. Thought asking for help meant showing weakness. That's not weakness, Dad. That's wisdom. Samuel turned to his son, pride evident in his eyes. When did you get so smart? Learn from the best, Derek replied with a grin. You taught me about justice long before I joined the FBI. Watching you work this land, treat everyone with respect regardless of how they treated you. Those were my first lessons in what's right. A whippoorwill called from the woods, its song carrying across the twilight. Samuel listened, remembering all the evenings he'd spent on this porch, worried about the future. Now, for the first time in weeks, he felt truly at peace. Tomorrow I head back to Washington, Derek said softly. But I've arranged for Agent Rodriguez to keep an eye on things here. She'll make sure the changes stick. Samuel nodded. The town feels different already, like people are finally seeing each other clearly. Change takes time, Derek agreed. But it starts with moments like this, people coming together, standing up for what's right. As darkness settled over the farm, fireflies began to emerge, their gentle lights dancing across the fields. Samuel thought about the generations of his family who had worked this land, faced their own struggles, endured their own storms. Your grandfather would be proud, he said finally, not just of what you've accomplished, but of how you've used your position to help others. That's what he dreamed of when he bought this land. A place where justice could take root and grow. Derek squeezed his father's shoulder. It's still growing, Dad, and now it's stronger than ever. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the fireflies and listening to the night sounds of the farm. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine from Grace's vines, and for a moment, Samuel could almost feel her presence, approving of all that had transpired. The next morning, as Derek prepared to leave, the farm was already bustling with activity. More volunteers had arrived to help with the remaining repairs, and Tommy Parker was organizing a schedule to ensure Samuel had support through the harvest season. You don't have to worry about me, Samuel assured his son as they stood by Derek's car. I'm not alone anymore. You never were, Dad, Derek replied, hugging him tightly. You just needed reminding. As Samuel watched his son's car disappear down the dirt road, he felt a profound sense of peace settle over him. The morning sun cast long shadows across his fields, just as it had done every morning for decades. But now those shadows seemed less threatening, more like old friends marking the passage of time. He walked to his vegetable garden, kneeling to check the tomato plants that had suffered during his weeks of distraction. New growth was already visible, green shoots reaching toward the sun with renewed vigor. Like his farm, like his community, they were resilient, ready to flourish again after the storm. The sound of laughter drifted across the yard as more neighbors arrived to help. Samuel stood, brushing dirt from his knees, and smiled. His mother's old saying came back to him. Justice is like a seed. It needs good soil, careful tending, and patience to grow. Looking around at his restored farm, at the people working together in the morning light, Samuel knew that seed had finally taken root. And this time, it would grow strong and tall, nurtured by a community that had learned the true meaning of standing together. Together, they would ensure that the darkness that had haunted their town would never return. And if it did, they would face it as one, just as they had done here on his farm, where generations of hope and determination had finally blossomed into something beautiful and lasting. True justice, growing strong under the Georgia sun. 3 months after the arrests of officers Miller and Tucker, Samuel Johnson's farm had transformed into something more than just a place where vegetables grew. It had become a symbol of hope and resilience for the entire community. The autumn air was crisp as Samuel stood in his fields, surveying the abundant harvest before him. The damaged equipment had been replaced, the barn restored, and his crops were flourishing under the careful attention of not just himself, but the many hands that now regularly helped tend the land. Mr. Johnson, called Tommy Parker, walking up with a clipboard. The Farmers Market Committee wanted me to remind you about speaking at next week's Harvest Festival. Samuel chuckled. wiping his hands on his work pants. Still not sure why they want to hear from an old farmer like me. Are you kidding? Tommy's eyes widened. You're the reason this town's finally starting to feel like a real community again. People look up to you. It was true, though Samuel still found it strange. Since the incident, he'd been asked to speak at various community events, sharing his story of standing up to corruption. More importantly, his example had inspired others to come forward with their own experiences, leading to a wave of positive changes in town leadership. The new police chief, Maria Rodriguez, had implemented sweeping reforms. Body cameras were now mandatory, and a diverse community oversight board reviewed all complaints. The sight of patrol cars no longer filled people with dread. You know what's really something? Tommy continued, gesturing toward the road. Look at who's working together now. Samuel turned to see Bill Whitaker's pickup truck pulling in, followed by Mr. Chen's van. The unlikely pair had become regular volunteers at the farm, setting aside years of prejudice to work side by side. Today, they were helping with the sweet potato harvest. "Morning, Mr. Johnson," Bill called out, waving as he parked. His teenage son jumped out of the truck bed, already heading for the tool shed. "Brought those new irrigation parts you needed." Mr. Chen emerged from his van carrying a large thermos. "Hot tea for everyone," he announced with a smile. "My wife's special blend. Good for strength." Samuel watched as they organized themselves, their easy camaraderie a stark contrast to the tension that had once defined their interactions. The farm had become neutral ground, a place where old barriers began to crumble. Later that afternoon, while taking a break on his porch, Samuel received an unexpected call from Derek. "Dad, you'll never believe what happened." His son's excited voice came through the speaker. "Miller and Tucker just took a plea deal. They're going away for a long time, and they're giving up everyone else involved in their scheme." Samuel sat back in his rocking chair, letting the news sink in. "How long?" 15 years minimum. Plus, they have to pay restitution to all their victims. Derek paused. "Dad, I'm coming home next week. There are some things we need to discuss." The following week, as autumn colors painted the countryside in brilliant hues, Derek arrived at the farm. Father and son walked the property together, taking in the changes that had occurred since the summer's events. "The place looks better than ever," Derek observed, pausing by the newly restored barn. "But that's not why I'm here, Dad. I've been thinking about the future." Samuel raised an eyebrow. "Oh, I'm taking a position at the Atlanta field office," Derek announced. "Close enough to visit regularly, far enough to let you keep your independence." Samuel felt his heart swell with emotion. "Son, you don't have to dash." "I want to," Derek interrupted gently. "What happened here? It showed me the importance of staying connected to your roots. Besides," he grinned, "someone needs to keep an eye on you and make sure you're not working too hard." That evening, after Derek had gone to bed, Samuel sat at his kitchen table with a pen and paper. He'd been meaning to write this letter for months. "Dear Grace," he began, his weathered hand steady as he wrote. "You always said I was too proud for my own good, and you were right. But our boy helped me learn the lesson you tried to teach me all those years. That true strength comes from standing together. You should see the farm now, sweetheart. Those jasmine vines you planted are still blooming, and they've spread all along the porch. But more importantly, you should see how the town has changed. People who never spoke to each other are working side by side in our fields. Children play together regardless of their color. It's becoming the kind of place we always dreamed it could be. Derek makes us proud every day. He's not just enforcing the law. He's making sure justice serves everyone equally. Remember how you used to say, 'He had my stubbornness, but your heart?' You were right about that too. I miss you every day, but I feel your presence in every positive change that's happening here. Your spirit of kindness and acceptance is finally taking root in this community, and I know you'd be smiling to see it." Samuel paused, wiping away a tear before continuing. "Our grandson starts college next year. Can you believe it? He wants to study agricultural science. Says he wants to help modernize the family farm someday. The legacy you helped build will continue growing, just like those jasmine vines. With all my love, Samuel. He folded the letter carefully and placed it in his Bible, next to the pressed jasmine flower he'd saved from their wedding day. The next morning, Samuel rose early as usual, but something felt different. The weight of fear and isolation that had burdened him for so long was gone, replaced by a sense of purpose and connection. As he walked his fields in the dawn light, he noticed Mrs. Harrison's car pulling up. The retired schoolteacher now ran a program bringing students to learn about organic farming practices on his land. "Good morning, Mr. Johnson," she called out cheerfully. "The fourth graders are coming today. They're so excited about harvesting those pumpkins they planted." Samuel smiled, remembering how this same woman had once crossed the street to avoid him. Now she was one of his most enthusiastic supporters. By mid-morning, the farm was alive with activity. Children's laughter mixed with the sounds of work and conversation. The Martinez family had set up their food truck near the barn, serving lunch to volunteers. The smell of fresh tortillas and Mrs. Chen's tea created an atmosphere of warmth and welcome. Tommy Parker, who had become something of an unofficial farm manager, was giving tours to visitors from neighboring counties who wanted to learn about their community's transformation. "It all started right here," Samuel overheard him saying. "One man's courage showed us that change is possible when we stand together." As the sun began to set, Samuel stood on his porch, watching the last visitors leave. The field stretched out before him, golden in the evening light. His father's old truck sat gleaming with new paint next to Derek's car. The barn door swung gently in the breeze, its fresh coat of red paint a bright contrast against the darkening sky. A whippoorwill called from the woods, its song no longer seeming mournful but triumphant. The fireflies were beginning to emerge, their lights dancing across the fields like stars brought down to earth. Samuel thought about the letter in his Bible, about Grace's jasmine vines still blooming, about Derek moving closer to home, and about all the changes that had transformed his community. He thought about how fear and isolation had been replaced by strength and unity. "You were right, old girl," he whispered to the evening air, knowing somehow that Grace could hear him. The darkness doesn't last forever. Sometimes it just takes a little courage to let the light in, and as night settled over the farm, Samuel Johnson stood tall, no longer alone, but surrounded by the invisible threads of community, family, and hope that had finally woven themselves into something stronger than fear, more lasting than hatred, and more powerful than any darkness that might try to return. The farm would continue to grow, not just vegetables and fruits, but something far more precious, a legacy of justice, unity, and the courage to stand together against the shadows that threatened to divide them. And in that growth, Samuel had found not just peace, but a new purpose, one that would continue to bear fruit for generations to come. Samuel's and Derek's story is a powerful reminder that real strength isn't just about standing tall when everyone is watching, but how you handle yourself when you're underestimated and alone. What would you have done in Samuel's shoes, facing such injustice? Have you ever been scammed by someone unjustly? Let us know in the comments below. And if this story moved you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss more inspiring and heartwarming stories like this one.